All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something huge, the actual hard math behind renting versus buying a home, to see which path really builds more wealth. It is literally one of the biggest financial decisions you'll ever make, right? And yet somehow, most of us just go with our gut feelings instead of looking at the arithmetic. Well, today, we're flipping the script. We're going to zero in on this incredibly powerful metric called the 5% rule to finally figure out what actually makes sense for your wallet.
Because look, we've all heard this classic piece of advice from, our relatives. Let's just call him Uncle Dave. Renting is just throwing your money away. You're just paying someone else's mortgage. It's this generational slogan you hear shouted at literally every family barbecue. But today, we're going to tear down that deeply ingrained myth using pure, unfiltered math.
Section 1. The rent versus buy myth. Brian versus Rachel.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. We've got two identical people with the exact same income and the exact same savings. First up, Brian. Brian buys a $415,000 house. He puts 10% down, which is $41,500, and pays $10 grand in closing costs. He signs that 30-year fixed mortgage and gets a shiny new key. Rachel, on the other hand, she signs a lease to rent the exact same identical house down the street for $2 grand a month. She just gets a confirmation email, no fun housewarming party for her. But here is the kicker. She takes her $51,000 of upfront housing cash and drops it directly into a boring, total market index fund.
Section 2. Uncovering the hidden costs. Now, for that first week, Brian definitely feels like he's winning. His $2,360 mortgage payment is building equity, while Rachel's rent just kind of vanishes into thin air. But Brian is completely ignoring the true, unrecoverable costs of homeownership. See, his real monthly cost isn't just that mortgage payment. Once you factor in property taxes, rising homeowners insurance, and private mortgage insurance, that's that extra fee the bank slaps on because he didn't put a full 20% down, plus inevitable maintenance, well, his real cost is actually closer to $3,400 a month. Honestly, maintenance is a quiet killer. Roofs and furnaces have their own calendars, and Brian definitely wasn't invited to the scheduling meeting. And this perfectly illustrates how the math actually works in the beginning. Check this out. In the early years of a 30-year mortgage, almost none of your payment touches the loan itself. The vast majority of Brian's money is just going straight toward interest, taxes, and upkeep. When you think about it, he's essentially just renting money from the bank and paying extra for the privilege.
Section 3. The 5% rule.
Meanwhile, because Rachel is only paying $2,000 in rent, she has this massive $1,400 monthly gap compared to Brian's true costs, and she automatically invests that difference every single month. Which brings us to a really fast, incredibly powerful equalizer, the 5% rule. This one single number lets you calculate the true, unrecoverable cost of homeownership. That way, you can compare it directly against monthly rent in your specific city without needing some crazy, complex spreadsheet.
Okay, here is exactly how you use it. You simply take the total price of the home you're looking at and multiply it by 5%. Why 5%? Well, it roughly accounts for 1% in property taxes, 1% for maintenance, and 3% for the cost of capital. That's basically the investment returns you are missing out on by tying your cash up in a down payment. So you take that 5% total, divide it by 12 months, and compare that final number to the cost of renting an equivalent home. Simple, right?
Let's actually apply it to our scenario here. For Brian's $415,000 house, his unrecoverable cost is roughly $1,700 a month. Rachel, remember, is paying $2,000 a month in rent. What this means is that, strictly on paper, buying has a slight mathematical edge here over Rachel's rent. Now, if her rent were lower than $1,700, renting would actually win the formula.
Section 4. The renter's secret weapon.
Let's stretch this out on a timeline and see how the suspense builds over a 20-year journey. Because this mathematical advantage, it constantly shifts back and forth. By year 3, Rachel's liquid portfolio is sitting pretty at $80,000. Brian, meanwhile, has almost no usable equity because of the 5 to 6% realtor fees he'd have to cough up just to sell the place. But right around year 6, they hit the break-even point. This is the moment where the brutal early losses of buying and the early lead of renting just cancel each other out, and the momentum starts shifting back toward the buyer.
At this stage, they both have really unique advantages. Brian has real estate leverage, which means he gets to control and capture the growth of a massive $415,000 asset using only his initial $41,000 bet. He also gets tax-free capital gains when he finally sells. Rachel, however, she's got the incredible compounding power of the stock market, absolutely 0 weekends lost to the hardware store, and complete geographic freedom if she suddenly wants to pack up and move for a dream job. But here is the thing, Brian's true secret weapon is his fixed mortgage payment. While he's locked in, Rachel's rent silently creeps up about 4% every single year.
Section 5. The 20-year verdict.
As time pushes on, inflation actually becomes Brian's best friend. His mortgage gets comparatively cheaper and cheaper against his rising income, while Rachel's rent just continues to march higher and higher. Which leads us to our grand finale. After 2 straight decades of fixed payments and leaky roofs for Brian versus compounding stack returns and rent hikes for Rachel, who actually comes out on top? Does Uncle Dave finally get to say, "I told you so"?
Astonishingly, they end up in the exact same $500,000 to $600,000 ballpark. Now, keep in mind this assumes honest historical averages of a 1% real estate appreciation and a 7% stock market return after inflation. They arrive at the exact same destination, just in completely different vehicles. Rachel's wealth is highly liquid across 500 companies. She can cash out anytime she wants. Brian's wealth, on the other hand, is completely illiquid, trapped right inside the walls of a single house on a single street.
However, there is a giant catch here. The typical homeowner usually beats the typical renter out there in the real world. Why? Because a mortgage acts as a forced savings plan. It literally makes Brian build wealth at gunpoint from the bank. Whereas most renters, well, they kind of just get sloppy. They end up spending that $1,400 of extra monthly cash on takeout and nicer cars instead of diligently investing it like Rachel did.
So what's the bottom line here? What should you take away from all this? Honestly, neither path is a trap unless you choose it blindly. Buying absolutely wins if you plan to stay put for over 7 years, if the 5% rule reveals that rents in your city are historically high compared to home prices, or, and this is big, if you know deep down you just won't invest the difference. But renting is incredibly powerful and mathematically sound if you value mobility and you are a highly disciplined investor.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. And seriously, go run your own numbers on using that 5% rule. Are you making the single biggest financial decision of your life based on your own honest arithmetic? Or are you just blindly following a catchphrase from your Uncle Dave? Figure out your numbers, make your choice, and stick to your strategy. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. I will see you next time.